Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you find yourself in the world today. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a brief discussion about project management, and we're going to specifically be looking at software deployment project steps. So let me share my screen here. All righty. So when we look at project management principles, we look at the PMBOK, right? That's the gold standard. Project Management Institute, PMI. They set the standards, and the project management body of knowledge, that enormous volume that some of us who decide to get certified PMP certification or additional certifications, we're looking into the PMBOK and trying to learn these things. When we try to actually apply this in the real world, sometimes we have to do some scaling. We have to do a lot of scaling at times. So it seems to me like the PMBOK is, something that you would get deeper into doing it as it's outlined in the PMBOK if you were doing really big projects. As we scale these down to smaller projects and, specifically in this case, for this discussion, non-development projects, we're going to be trying to take the steps and the processes that are inspired by the PMBOK, and we're going to translate them out into something that may be a little more specific to doing software deployment. So that is what we're going to be talking about today: is how do we take, sort of these steps and processes in the PMBOK and use it in everyday life for, say, a software deployment where we've already got software that's baked, we're not developing it, we're getting the project strictly for the deployment or implementation of that particular product at a particular environment, whether it's a government agency or maybe it's a hospital system or a car dealership. We're going to do it in that environment. And how do we do that? So that's really what we're talking about today. So in project management, we often will see these high-level steps or combinations of processes, such as, this over on the left side, you can see this where we've got one, conception and initiation. And then we've got two, definition and planning. We've got launch and execution as our third, and our fourth is performance and control, also often known as monitoring and controlling, and five, project closure. So I've got these broken down into some things that maybe we can talk about in terms of we're scaling the intent of those five things we just talked about, and we're bringing them into something that's a little more specific for deployment. So our first thing we're going to do is we're going to define the project scope. In defining the project scope, we want to look at what the organization who purchased this product is really looking for. So what are the reasons in the instance of a car dealership? What are they trying to get out of this software? Okay. And we can certainly look at what's sold, and we should do that. That's the second bullet point on your screen. But when we do that, we probably need to know some more than that. We probably need to know what was the real reason they're spending this money. Yes, there's a bill of materials or it's a particular product on there, but they're looking for an outcome. And we want to know what that outcome is. That's very important in determining the project scope. And then that also lets us help to know if there's anything that should have been sold and it wasn't sold. So we may need to go back to the sales organization, or however it is that we received that particular project, and go back to that and say, we need some additional items sold because yes, I see what's on the contract or what's on the bill of materials, but in fact, looking at the top reasons for the customer signing, it's evident that it's not complete. And so that's important. We need to know what the actual scope of the project is according to the customer's perception. And that's this last bullet point. What are their broader expectations? More to the point, what are they going to define success as? Not necessarily what we would define success as in the project. I mean, we may go through and say, hey, we've been successful, we've executed, we've delivered. The customer may still, in their eyes, feel like they have not reached that point of success, or we're not done. And so we'd like to have those conversations up front. That's typically a better way to go. That leads us into this idea of holistic enterprise view. So what is a holistic enterprise view? Well, what I'm talking about with this is, what is the environment that the solution's being sold into, being implemented into, that we're trying to execute on? We need to know that, because when we're talking about software deployment, that's going to lead to the conversation of workflow. What's the workflow in this organization? And it's very helpful to understand at a holistic level more about the organization that this solution is going into. It's going to help us understand if the solution fits into the workflow or if the workflow needs to change. Maybe that's all part of the project, but maybe it's something that hasn't been spoken of and it's something we need to have a conversation with. That may be internally, or it may be externally, or it may be both, that we need to have those conversations. So we're just looking at, a car dealership layout here. And so if we're implementing solutions for the different areas of this car dealership, whether it's in accounting, or whether it's parts and service, or maybe it's F&I, where they're putting the deals together and doing the finance and insurance part of this as folks come in and purchase vehicles. We need to understand how our solution and how the workflow is going to work in this environment. And it's not the same for every environment, right? So, we're using the case of a car dealership, which could be big or small. Suppose we're talking about medical. Suppose we're talking about a hospital, a campus. That hospital campus, they may have multiple buildings. They may have separate practices that are a part of that campus, but are actually different organizations. They may actually have different hospital systems co-located on the same campus. I mean, these are things that we may need to understand if we're putting medical solution software into that environment. How does that affect the workflow? So that really is part of the scope. So we really understand the scope, both from our perspective as implementing this, and also from the customer's perspective of what's the end result that they're looking for. And that's a really important conversation to have. That's going to lead us to assigning our project team. So we scoped it out. So now we have a better idea of the kind of resources we need. Your organization might have a way to do this that's more defined. You might have an actual, workforce system or a department that does this. You may have a list of approved vendors that you'll have to come in to do the work. And so you, as the project manager, you may actually be assigning this resource, or you may have these resources assigned to you based on the roles and responsibilities that you need on the project. But you certainly need to determine what resources do you need to be successful. And once you get the project team, what do you do with them? So I would recommend that you get them together and you start talking about things in a collaborative, team-based way. And the best way to get a team-based approach is to model that yourself. So that leads us into the third bullet point here, which is clear communications. You don't want to be ambiguous. You want to be straightforward. And you also want to let your team know, hey, I'm going to be there for you if you have challenges. You know, don't just go off and try to fix it on your own and pretend it's not going, not well for you. Let me know. And you want to encourage that kind of two-way dialogue. It's always better to know the issues up front and to let people know, hey, we are in a team environment. We need to support each other so that we can all succeed together, face off against the solution that the customer is looking for, and get to end a job and do it well, do it on budget and on time. So getting to the next item, we've got our resources assigned. We know the project scope, resources assigned. We're going to start identifying some risks. You've probably already been getting some risks and collecting some of those risks into a list or something, or maybe in a mental list if you've just been coming across some of these things. When you defined the scope and when you started talking with your project team, or at least you started, interacting with whoever was going to assign that. So when we look at risks, we want to look at, are there any technical challenges that this solution is going to face? So if you've done your scoping and then you've looked at your resource, you know what's been sold, then you can sometimes tell right away, we have a technical problem here. What we need to get done and what we actually have to face off against that is not really going to work so well. You might just have a sense of it, or you might have actual specific technical reasons why you feel like we have an issue here. There's risk. There's a risk of us not being successful in this project. Also, what's the culture at the organization where we're going to be operating? What's the culture for your customer's organization? Is it something that's going to be risk averse? Are they trying to hold back change? On the third bullet point item, are there actually detractors? Are there people who would just love to see this thing go down in flames? They may want a different solution, or they may just not want to have any different solution. So we need to investigate that. That's clearly risk that can affect the quality of your project and how ultimately how successful it's going to be. And then what are the unwritten expectations? Now, this is very common that there's unwritten expectations that the customer has, or sometimes even within your own organization, unwritten expectations. Could be that you've got a salesperson that's from another organization and they're used to having things done in a certain way, and your organization just doesn't fulfill some of those things. I mean, there are so many different examples that could go into unwritten expectations, but they definitely can represent real risk on your projects. So you want to identify those things. And that leads us into scheduling. So we've got some great information now to schedule. We've got our project scope. We have folks assigned to us on the team to do work, and we've identified risks. And so now we're in a great place to schedule. Now, in your organization, you may have this in a different order because you may have a defined process that your organization has come up with that changes this. But for the sake of the conversation, scheduling is a great place for it to naturally fall after you've got scope and resources and you have some risks identified. So when we go into scheduling, what are we scheduling? Well, we're scheduling individual work items, specific tasks to be done. In project management, we typically talk about tasks as being part of milestones. Milestones are significant significant time markers on your project that you need to reach, and each of those milestones is made up of tasks. So, this is kind of a basic for project management. Some organizations may treat this a little differently, but generally speaking, when we talk about milestones, we're talking about a collection of tasks that all roll up to be completed and to complete that milestone. And so if we map our specific work tasks into milestones, then we can start scheduling. We can schedule the tasks up into the milestones and the milestones relative to each other. That sort of a thing is what we want to be doing. Once we've got all this in place, we want to kick this thing off. What is kickoff? It could mean launch. It could mean a variety of things. You could have different nomenclature that you're using to denote what a kickoff is. Basically, we're going to start working on the project. Okay, so we've got all of these other things done, and now we want to actually start working with the customer and with the team to have them do the work to execute on this project. That'll very often be done with meetings. So, that might be in person. More likely today, it's going to be virtual. Either way, this could look like a meeting with your customer where you officially launch the project work. And then you can set expectations with the customer. You might go through a slide deck and you might set some expectations about different team members that are going to reach out to them to perform work. And so they're not surprised. And it kind of gives them a sense of, everything you've pulled together. They've been heard, they've been listened to, we know what's going on, give them a sense of confidence, get them engaged. After you do that is a good time to meet with your project team. Yeah, you could flip these. It's kind of nice to tell the customer ahead of time you're going to be contacted and kind of give them a great snapshot of where you're at and you're ready to do the work before people start interacting with them. That can be nice. It can be helpful. It doesn't have to be that way. And then if you do it in this order, then you've also got the ability to go to your team and say, hey, we've had the kickoff with the customer and they're expecting your call, and you might be dealing with very technical folks who their soft skills might vary quite a bit. So it might be good news to them that the customer, that parts manager at the dealership, they're already ready for my call. They're expecting me to contact them to discuss setups or to get this information to do this thing. And it's just kind of nice to have it flow that way, if that works out. Now we're going to move into monitor and control. This is something that you need to be careful with, okay? Watch out, there's risk ahead, curves ahead, as they say, and monitor and control can be like a quiet time. Sometimes it's too quiet. That's what I mean by there could be risk here. So you've kicked off, right? Work is started, everything's going great. You're like, all right, we're set. But you may actually not be set. You may actually need to go back and say, okay, what's actually going on? Is the work getting done? And are we hitting those dates? So you want to track the completion of tasks, and you want to monitor the completion of the milestones that those tasks make up. Then you want to start looking at late work. And so, it's inevitable. There's going to be some items that don't hit the schedule, and that may be fine. So, we're always looking at, what do we do about the risk? What do we do about what just happened? So late tasks is basically risk, or it's adding risk to your project. But you have a decision to make with these late tasks. Do you want to accept the late date? Do you want to mitigate it in some way, or do you just want to reschedule that work? So this is, again, a time where it can seem quiet, and it can seem like your assumption is everything's perking along great, but we really, as project managers, we need to be looking and seeing, are things actually getting completed? And where we need to communicate that to the project team. So, it's always better in project management to over communicate than to under communicate. You want to make sure everybody is aware and in the loop, particularly your project team. So if things are running behind schedule in a particular area, let's let the team know. I mean, let's just make sure everybody's aware of what's going on. Now, it may or may not be appropriate to clue the customer in. Some of these things are things we're just dealing with behind the scenes. They may not need to know. It doesn't go off schedule enough. It doesn't affect something that's a deliverable we need from them during the course of executing the project. They may not need to be aware of it, but they may need to be, or maybe they're not giving us something we need. And so, those conversations might need to take place. And so, assuming all this is gone, well, we're at a certain point, we're ready to fire this thing up. That can be called live time, go live. It can be called, a variety of different things. But we're basically, in the case of deploying new software, we're ready to start that software up. We're ready to get out there and crank that sucker up, okay? So we're going to maintain close contact with the customer, and we're going to keep in close contact with the project team. And so think about this in software terms. We could be cutting over to a new system. We could have a hard cut over where we stop processing on the old system and we start processing on the new. There could be something that isn't that clean, where there's some data being processed on two different systems, even though one's going to replace another. And we could also be looking at things where we're still doing a late conversion of data from one system to another. Or, in the case of a car dealership, we may have work in process being put into the new system. Repair orders that are open in the service department, and there may be deals sitting in F&I where a customer is purchasing a vehicle and the deal hasn't gone through yet. I mean, things happen like that, and so we want to be making sure that we're staying in contact with the customer and the team and looking at those things. And as issues come up, and issues are inevitable, as issues come up, we want to be giving them some kind of weight, some kind of priority, so that we know how critical they are. The last bullet point on this slide is escalate critical issues. If you don't know what the priority or the weight is behind that issue, it's kind of difficult to know. How aggressively do you need to escalate, if you need to escalate, and that particular thing? So you want to be making sure that you're documenting issues that are going on and giving them some kind of weight or priority. Your organization may have a defined way of doing things. It might be, 1, 2, 3, ABC. It might be, it's a red priority or yellow or it's a green priority. In other words, it's an issue that didn't actually cause any adverse reactions, but we want to capture it. Capturing data is good. If it's an issue that's going on, it's always good to try to capture it if you can, even if you think it's not going to have an effect. Sometimes we're wrong, and things do have effects down the line after the fact, or they are more critical than we thought they were. It's always nice to collect the data. If you have to come back and look at it again, you've already got it. So, that would be, kind of a recommendation of mine. Then once we're live, sometimes folks have a tendency to not want to do this close and accept phase. But it's a really good idea to actually have a formal closure with your customer. And also, if you can with your team, maybe there's an activity where you release resources back into a pool. But with the customer, we want to understand that we want to understand that they have actually gotten to a point where they feel like they can accept the solution and we're done. Or if there's any remaining any issues that are outstanding, what's the path to resolution? Or there's some issues where we've decided that there's really no good way to resolve this, but we want to make sure everybody's clear and we're going to accept this. Sometimes a customer may refuse to take acceptance and you may need to document that. Your organization may have a process or a policy in place to do that. You certainly want to document if your customer is saying, I don't agree that we're done, but your organization, you and your organization may say, well, we feel like we are. But it's important to just document that, and if you can, to garner that official acceptance from the customer. It's a really good idea to do that. And again, your organization may have a formalized process to do that. And then the thing that maybe overlooked the most is lessons learned. And it's a really important opportunity to take the things that not only didn't go well, but also things that maybe did go well. And it's important that an organization understand if it's doing something that has value, um, to keep doing it. So it may be that there are things being done in your projects, no one ever gives feedback on it. And at some point, when the process is being refined and it's being updated, those things may get stripped out if there's no feedback to the organization doing the changes, that in fact, those things add value. So yeah, it's important to capture successes as well as things that were issues or did not go well. And what we're really trying to do here is embrace this concept of a Kaizen. It's a Japanese concept. It's been around a lot. You've probably heard it many times. You may actually have an organization that runs Kaizen activities of its own. This is the idea of continuous improvement. So, you as a project management practitioner, one of the great values that you can add to an organization that you're uniquely placed to add is this lessons learned activity. Others in your organization with different roles, they may not be doing this, but you have an opportunity to affect the quality of the work going forward, to improve things in the future. And so I just encourage you to see, if your organization does not have a defined lessons learned process, try to do some kind of concept, some kind of way of approaching this on your own. And you can do it in many ways. I would just encourage that. And so that's really what I had for you today. Just basically a discussion about how do we scale some of these big processes and big steps and big concepts that we see in the project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK. How do we scale that into something like a defined software deployment? And I hope this has been useful to you. And I hope you'll continue to have discussions about this with your peers and continue to try to improve the quality of our practice in project management. And you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, Roy Ian Foster. And so hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and take care.